Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the Google Pixel 3 and see how it holds up in 2021. Now, what I can tell you is, obviously this device is a very perplexing phone. On one hand, I think it's a pretty stable device, but on the other hand, we're kind of getting towards the end of its life cycle. And even though it's not even that old of a device for a Pixel phone, it is kind of getting to a point where some of the hardware features this phone had are kind of becoming outdated, and some of the most important features of this thing may not even be here come next year. So that's kind of my intro to this device. If you want to pick it up, I'll leave this phone as well as some other phones that I'd recommend this year. I'll leave them linked down below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front and the body, the Google Pixel 3 had that 5.5-inch P OLED display, and it's a full HD panel 1080p, and ultimately I can tell you this is still a solid panel for the most part, but as I said before, there are some areas where this phone's panel just isn't really that great. I think it's a good panel for sure, but when you compare it to today's standards, we have things like 120 Hz and fingerprint sensor in the display and all that stuff. You don't really get that here, but this is an extremely important thing. This phone came out in 2018, so you have to kind of compare it to those phones, and at that time there weren't really a lot of devices that were having that capability anyway, so I think that kind of makes it move it away a little bit. But the Pixel 3's panel I think is still actually pretty good when you factor in those specific things as well as the price tag. Now, you do have a front facing speaker on the front as well, and you do have a little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, which is funny because this thing almost looks identical to the Pixel 3a, which I've already reviewed, and I love that phone a lot too. So that really pretty much covers it up in the front standpoint. USB Type-C on the bottom, and on the back you have like the polycarbonate plastic type of material, whatever it is. The fingerprint sensor there too. The glass I think it's like a little shiny plastic, whatever it is up top as well. This phone has wireless charging, so it's probably glass in my opinion. And you also have the single camera setup with the flash, and I think the way this phone feels in the hand, it's so funny because it doesn't feel like a cheap phone. It doesn't feel like the most expensive phone either. It feels like a pretty decent feeling phone in the hand. And I think in terms of the body, with the mixture of the USB Type-C, with the mixture of all this other stuff, it still has a pretty up-to-date body. If you throw a case on it, you're really not going to notice anything. And when you consider this thing as like around $200, it's really not that bad of a device in my opinion. So in terms of that, in terms of the body, that really pretty much covers it up. But there is one area where this phone shined at when it first came out, it still is good at, and is kind of going to become outdated sooner than later, and it's the camera. So it has that single camera setup on the back, like I stated, a 12.2 megapixel wide-angle lens, and there is kind of a flip-floppy debate with this type of device, even with the Pixel 4. And the problem with this device was ultimately that when you had a phone like this, one of its biggest selling points wasn't the, premiumness of it. It wasn't the screen, it was the camera and the software. And the camera of it I think was great at the time. The quality of these photos are still really good, but the problem is that because we only have that single camera setup, it has already kind of become outdated. So what does this mean? It means that pretty much because we only have that single camera setup, we don't have that telephoto lens or an ultra wide sensor or any of those cool features that some of these newer phones have. You're already kind of outdated in that standpoint. On top of that, we don't have 4K at 60 on this device. Now, me personally, I pretty much shoot all my videos in 1080p, but still having that ability to go up to 4K 60 whenever we want to is a really cool advantage, and a lot of devices have that nowadays. I would say more devices than not come out with that. Even a lot of budget phones have that capability. This device does not have that capability. Again, it came out in 2018. You can't really go super hard on it, but for a phone whose one of its main selling points is actually the camera, it kind of is a weird thing, and Google kind of kept it out for the next device as well. So it's very weird that they did it, but ultimately what I can tell you is the specific way to look at it that standpoint is that the camera on the back is okay for the most part. Nowadays, it was probably great when it came out. You do have that dual front-facing camera, so an 8 megapixel wide, then 8 megapixel ultra wide, and again, only 1080p videos on the front. I think it's a great thing that this thing had a dual camera setup, but again, it's one of those standpoints where it's like only 1080p, there's no 4K. A lot more people nowadays, I feel like, use their front camera more than their back camera, so it's kind of one thing to keep in mind. But in terms of the camera, I'll say it's kind of probably like a 6 out of 10 nowadays, to be honest. I think the quality is good, but the lack of the features and the lack of resolutions and the lack of lenses, that's kind of a big thing to keep in mind. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. Now, hating on probably the best thing about this phone, but also something that's kind of coming to an end, is actually the software. So this thing originally came out with Android 9, which I feel like it just came out. Wow, this phone is just like crazy relevant in my opinion, because Android 9 is like still a pretty decent software. You are able to get Android 11 on this device, which is great. I've already been having the beta on and everything. It's been a good experience, and it's been officially out for a long time. We are going to be getting Android 12 very soon in terms of a beta standpoint, and at that point, that's probably going to be the last version that this phone is going to be getting. Now, there's two ways to look at this. Again, there's the way looking at it like, oh, this thing's only getting one more version of Android, that's it. But the other way to look at it is that this phone came out in 2018. It's not a new phone anymore, and the fact that it's still getting software support is actually pretty impressive in and of itself. So I think ultimately the software longevity of these Pixel devices are awesome, and I love seeing these phones get software update after software update. But the other thing to keep in mind is that you still have custom ROM capability on this device too. So for some reason you don't want to go ahead and, just have this thing outdated on Android 12 once that officially comes out, then you can pretty much just custom ROM this thing and be perfectly happy. Like, you have a lot of different options when you have a device like this, so you're pretty much set in that standpoint. The battery life is also pretty average as well. So I mean, it has a 2,915 mAh battery. It's definitely not amazing, it's definitely not horrible, it's kind of like in the middle. This thing luckily does, like I said, have stock software, so you're pretty much good in that standpoint. But again, it's another thing to keep in mind. Like, do you want to have a amazing software with kind of average battery life? It is something to keep in mind at the end of the day. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. Now let's go and hit on the performance of this device. So this thing, when it first came out, had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset inside of it, an Adreno 630 GPU, and 4 gigabytes of RAM on every single model that this device came out in. Now, what I can tell you is that for the most part, this device's performance is still pretty good. I really don't think you're going to have too many complaints with it. I will say the number one thing to keep in mind is that this is an older device, so you're not going to have like the best, most up-to-date experience. You're not going to be getting those like 8 gigabytes of RAM. You're not going to be getting, like the crazy 120 hertz display. But because it's a Pixel, you're going to be getting an extremely good performing phone. You're going to be getting an extremely smooth performing phone too. So like I stated, when you have something like this, for the most part, you're going to be okay. Now, on top of that, you're getting the smoothest factor with Pixel, you're getting all that kind of stuff too, so I really don't think you're going to be missing out on too much. But again, like I stated, this is an older phone, so you're not going to be getting like the best performance ever, but for basic tasks and everything like that, you're going to be perfect. For even heavier intensive apps, games and, multitasking between apps and stuff, you're going to be okay. But if you're trying to do, a bunch of multitasking between a bunch of different apps, that's probably when you're going to run into the most amount of problems. And the reason this is because you're going to be running out of RAM. You only have 4 gigs of RAM. So if this thing had like 12 or 8 gigs of RAM, that's different. Unfortunately, it doesn't have that capability. So that's a pretty big thing to keep in mind, but that pretty much covers it up in the performance standpoint. Now, to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up the Google Pixel 3 in 2021? Well, this is what I'll pretty much tell you. I think with getting the Pixel 3, you're getting a lot of different devices that are still, you're getting a lot of features that are still super relevant. So first of all, the Pixel 3, the display is, I think, an asset for it for sure. The body of it doesn't really feel that bad. You're getting USB Type-C, which is great. You're getting a pretty good back camera and an okay front camera with the dual camera setup, which I think is pretty cool. The biggest asset I think of this phone nowadays is probably the software. Like I stated before, when you get a device like this, the software is going to be amazing. You're not going to have an outdated phone in terms of that. And that is probably one of the main reasons to go and pick up something like the Pixel 3, is because you have that software experience, the stock software, even without custom ROMing it. But you also have all those different type of custom ROMs that you can install on this thing too. So that's another pretty big asset for it for sure. So I think ultimately I would probably recommend picking up the Google Pixel 3. I don't think it's like the best phone ever. I think if you can spend a little bit more money, getting something like the Samsung Galaxy S10 will get you something like a way crazier experience in terms of features and everything you can get from a device. It did come out a couple months after the Pixel 3, so it's a little bit of a newer phone, and it is more expensive, but it is one of those phones that just has the craziest capability. Reverse wireless charging, 1440p OLED display, like crazy things on the Galaxy S10, even an S10e, but take it as you will. But I think something like the Google Pixel 3 is still a perfect device for a lot of people. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.